Hi everyone, the purpose of this video is to cover minute taking. This is an activity that each member of the team will at some point have the opportunity to participate in. So for each of the formal meetings we're going to have throughout the course, there will be formal minutes taken. So I just want to cover how we go about completing that activity. So if you have a look on Moodle under week 2, you'll see that there are a few documents that have been added. So we've got the meeting minutes template. So this is a document that I would expect everyone to use when taking minutes during their meeting. And there's also, to help you out, there's an example meeting minutes. So that's an example of this document that's been completed. Obviously it's been completed for a project different from the one you've been assigned, but it gives you the general idea of the kind of information that you need to input, the right format to put it in, and the level of detail. As well, to help you out, there's also a fact sheet on meetings. Most of this was covered in the PowerPoint slides from week 1, if you've had a look through them. But if you want a quick sort of reference to have sitting beside you, it covers other items. I'll just open it up just now, such as how to run the meetings. So for the very first meeting, I'm going to be the chairperson to help you make sure I understand everybody knows how to run a formal meeting. And thereafter it'll be handed over to a member, a different member of your team for each meeting that takes place. So if you're in that position of responsibility, then you can have a quick run through this just as a wee quick reminder of what your duties are. So I'm not going to read through that, you guys can have a wee read through, it's on Moodle. Okay, back to the purpose of this video, which is to discuss minute taking. So minute taking is really important. It's necessary in order to record information that's discussed at the meeting. Meetings are all about making decisions, so the decisions will be recorded. They're also about planning, so any tasks or activities that have to be carried out, they'll be discussed at the meeting. And importantly, we need to assign actions to those activities to make sure that they get done. Once they're documented, then they can be tracked. So it means that at future meetings we can track whether or not these activities have been achieved. So the idea is, behind the meeting minutes, they're not supposed to be a huge log of absolutely everything that's went on. As much detail as possible is good, but obviously it helps if you can do this in sort of shorthand notation. So don't try and write sentences, don't try and write down for word what people are saying. Listen to the conversation and then just summarise it with some bullet points. That's the easiest way of going about it. So the format of the template we have here, as you can see, straightforward format. So we've got the title, so the title of the meeting, obviously the date when it's taking place and the time of the meeting. This row here is where you should be listing all attendees for the meeting. So put a list of all the names of the people who have turned up. And this row below it is apologies. This is where you list all of the people who have not attended the meeting. So if you're invited to attend a formal meeting, it is etiquette that if you cannot attend, you should respond with an apology and a reason for why you can't attend. Obviously in this situation, in the college environment where you're tasked with this as part of your team working unit, the requirement is for you to attend all meetings. Okay, we've then got the templates then split into 4 columns. So first column basically is a list of all the agenda items. Now, barring the first sort of 3 items, the agenda will change each meeting. So this can be filled in by the minute taker prior to the meeting using the agenda for the meeting. So just to show you what I mean by that, let's have a look at the agenda for our meeting that's taking place in week 2. So these are all the agenda points. So if we have a quick scroll down, we have got 10 agenda points. The first 3 are standard for every meeting that takes place. You'll always start with apologies, reviewing the minutes in the previous meeting. Basically that's just a case of checking that everybody received the minutes, because it's the job of the minute taker once the meeting's finished. They will finalise the minutes after the meeting, so finish typing them up, and then it's their responsibility to distribute them to the rest of the team. So this point here is basically to make sure that the team did receive the minutes from the previous meeting, they've read them and they agree with the content. Now that's really important, because in the minutes of the meeting, you could have been assigned an action which you might not have agreed to take on, or you might not agree with the detail. So it is important that everybody reviews the minutes and responds appropriately. So normally this tends to just be a show of hands, where everybody generally agrees that they approve of the previous meeting's minutes. Obviously, for the first meeting, you don't have any previous meeting minutes, so we won't be able to, or it's not necessary for us to complete this agenda point. Agenda point 3, this is where we review the actions from the previous meeting. So as I said, throughout the meeting, if there are activities or tasks that are required to be done, then they will be discussed, and each task should be assigned an owner or someone that's responsible for making sure that task is completed. So the first thing we do is we look back at the actions from the previous meeting, and we go through and we make sure that those actions are at the right stage. So in some cases, the actions maybe have a date that means they should be completed. In other cases, it might just be the case that the actions for those actions are still in progress. So we should just check that everything's still either finished or is continuing to progress. So those 3 points happen at the start of every meeting. So you'll notice if I go back to the meeting minutes, which we've got here, you'll see that literally in the agenda item column, we just list each of the items from the agenda. So we've got minutes of last meeting, number 3 is matters arising. The rest are blank because, as I said, this changes from meeting to meeting. So I would start to fill this in. So I would have number 4, I'd take that from my agenda, and I would pop that in there as well. So again, you would just populate this with each of your agenda items. So that should really be done prior to the meeting, because the agenda is made available prior to the meeting. So the nominated minute takers should have that already prepared. Okay, the next column, the discussion or decision, is basically to document the outcome of the discussion round about the agenda item. So for instance, agenda item 2, minutes of last meeting, then that would just be minutes approved, because that's what happened, unless of course there was any issues. For matters arising, again in here you would list maybe all actions complete, or certain list of actions are complete, you would list those, and separately you might list the other previous actions are still in progress. So it's just a kind of summary of the discussion round about that agenda item. Okay, the third column, if there is an action required as a result of this discussion, or more than one action potentially, then you need to note what that action is. And if possible, if you can, also put a date against that action. So typically you won't have anything for these first 2 agenda items, but once you start to do the actual meeting specific agenda items, which in our case, if we go back to the agenda, are items 4 to 8. So items 4 to 8 are specific to this meeting. So for each of those, when you've discussed them, you would fill in any discussion surrounding each of these items. If there was any particular decisions made, you would note them as well. And if any actions came from this, you would note what the action was and if there was a date for that action to be completed. The last column is where you would put in details of the person, or can be multiple people, so persons responsible for completing each of those actions. So again, you would list the names here. I'm going to jump over at this point to an example of completed meeting minutes to show you what that generally looks like. So here's an example of completed meeting minutes. So you can see here we've got the date, the time, location, minute taker, etc. So there's a list of everybody that was present. Now what I would normally do is I would make note of who was the chairperson. So in brackets I would put the chairperson for that meeting, because you should all try and rotate these tasks. And I would also take a note of who the minute taker was as well. So again, it's rotated. Another thing I would do is, beside each person, I would give them in brackets a unique way of identifying them, normally using their initials. Obviously, if you've got any duplicates, then you might have to add in a letter. So Sajid Ahmed, I've just put him as SA. Angelica, so her initials are AA. David McDougall, DM, and Kate Watson, I would put in as KW. Okay. The reason for that is because when you come to put in the actions, the person responsible, you can just put in their identifier, so their initials in most cases. And it just, again, it means that it makes the document shorter and there's not as much writing to do, especially when you're typing quite fast, trying to keep up with the pace of the meeting. So you can see here that agenda item 2 was the first actual specific agenda item for this meeting. So you can see that the task was to, or the agenda item was identification of research and allocation of tasks. So this is what happened when they discussed that subject. So just a brief summary of what was discussed, and then importantly, what actions came out of that discussion. So you can see here that as a result of identifying the research and allocating the tasks, they've actually came up with several actions. So there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 actions came out of that. So in this column is a description of the action and the date of when it's to be completed. Beside each action, in the final column, is the person that's going to be responsible for completing that task. So that's really important. So I'll scroll down as another few examples here. So one of the agenda items is update progress by each member. So here are the progress reports that were received, and here's the resulting actions that need to be taken. And you'll see in this case there's actually one person assigned, but they've also got 2 other people supporting in that role. So you can have more than one person assigned to an action. Down here you can see all group members are responsible for contributing to updating the project plan. At the very bottom, we always finish off with AOB, which is just any other business. And you'll see that's on our agenda as well. It's a kind of standard thing in case people, as we're talking through it, maybe come up with other things that they can think of that weren't included in the agenda, or that they wanted to add after the agenda was released. And then of course you need to schedule your next meeting, and that's important to try and do that, because the idea is you should be doing it with the agreement of everybody that that's a date and time that they can make. Okay, so that's really the process of filling in the meeting minutes. Now obviously it's important that you capture enough information to then let you move forward with your project. So please make sure, if you don't get all the detail in while the meeting is in progress, which is unlikely you will, because you'll be listening and trying to type. It's quite a multitasking exercise. After the meeting, as soon as you finish that meeting, you need to just make sure that you fully populate this document before anything's lost. Now, just because you're the minute taker doesn't mean that people can't also contribute to this document. So what I would recommend you do is, once you've completed the minutes, if that's your current role, then you share that with your team. In this case, we're going to be using Slack to share documentation. You'll share the meeting minutes with your team and ask them to review and provide feedback. Okay, and at this point, this is where each team member has the responsibility to fill in any gaps in information, or to change anything, or to request that we change anything that they feel is inaccurate, or anything they disagree with. So there is a period where the minutes are issued and there's a period of review. As the minute taker, when you put those minutes out for review, put a deadline on it for when you have to get responses by. If you've not had any responses by a particular deadline, then you can assume that those minutes are final. and that will form your finalised minutes for the meeting. Okay, I'm just going to end the session now. Obviously, if there's more questions, we've got our forum, so please ask questions. And for the first formal meeting, as I said, I'm going to chair it, so there'll be opportunity to ask questions then as well. Okay, thanks for listening, guys. I hope you found this helpful.